Welcome everybody to Breathlab 3.0, Breathlab 3.0. This one is on the exhale. Last time, if you missed it, it's posted to YouTube. You can find it there. I'm telling you, it's a wild, wild breath world out there. And what we're trying to do is make some sense of it between ourselves so that when we speak to those who are not breathers or interested in breath, we sound like folks who have actually had this conversation before. That's the general idea. Because if we can't figure it out internally and call ourselves into question and have a legitimate conversation around authentic ideas and divergent thought and breath, then we certainly can't expect the mainstream to tolerate us for very long once we get our moment at the mic. So I just want to do first a quick check, make sure our panel is actually in attendance. Please sound off. Dan Brule.
Hey, hello everyone. Great to be here. Brother. Thanks for showing up.
Welcome, welcome. Dr. Peter Litchfield, are you in the hizzy?
He's here, but has to unmute.
Got it. I thought maybe I didn't translate hizzy.
No, I'm right here,
There he is.
Sage. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be back for our third meeting together. Thank you.
Outstanding, Peter. It's an honor to have you here, Dr. Litchfield. Hi, Louise Brule. Welcome, Louise. Who else? Jill Miller. Jill Miller, are you in the room? Okay, we're going to wait on Jill Miller. Casper Vandermeulen. In the room? Not yet. Brian McKenzie, you in the room?
I am here.
There he is. All right, so we're going to wait for Jill, and when they
Jill is here. Jill is here.
Outstanding.
I saw her.
Boom.
A lot of people's.
And I saw Casper on social media in a cave an hour ago. So if I don't know, I was like, I don't know how he's actually going to make it from that cave, wherever he's at, to Breathlab. So if he doesn't show, we'll just assume he's caving, spelunking somewhere, doing amazing things. Yeah, he's in Iceland. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, Casper's cruising, man. Casper's doing all kinds of fun stuff. So we will wait for him to join us, but we won't go ahead and hold things at bay. I want to go ahead and get us started. First of all, I want to just say that Breathlab was created to promote what's cool in breath, what's interesting in breath. No single breath worker can be possibly expected to keep up on the latest in science and new information and data that's coming at us. So Breathlab is here to provide what we think is the coolest and most interesting and relevant stuff that's flying around in the breath world. So the first thing I want to do tonight is introduce my good buddy Sam Whiting. Sam Whiting is doing a thing with James Nestor this coming Saturday. The James Nestor, the book that everybody's reading, the icebreaker, that's getting this topic out into the mainstream. And Sam is going to be doing a Q&A with James Nestor, 10 a.m. Go to samuelwhiting.com. I'm going to write that down. Samuel Whiting. Make sure I spelled it actually correctly. Boom. No, I sent that privately to Louise Brule. Ha. Never mind. I'm going to go ahead and figure out a way. samuelwhiting.com or go to Whiting Energy. Sam, why don't you go ahead and throw your email in there while we're at it. Please, everyone, 10 a.m. It's a free opportunity to breathe. It's by donation, and you get a chance to talk to Sam and James Nestor. Now, next order of business, I want to introduce you to someone very, very special. To wit, I was unable to completely follow every single administrative function and keep Breathlab growing in the way that it wanted to. So what I did was went and found some of the most smart and intelligent people in the breath world I could find. I want to introduce to you Mr. Owen Monroy. He's the director of Breathlab. He's going to be heading up all of the education stuff moving forward. He works with Altitude Contrast. He has done NCAA women's volleyball coaching. He's a performance coach, an endurance coach. He's extremely versed in CO2 tolerance and the metabolic rate and all sorts of interesting stuff. He's creating in a passionate way some very special N=1 case study opportunities that you can all be a part of here at Breathlab moving forward, and we can open source that data to the community. So Owen, why don't you just come on real quick, say hi to people for a couple of seconds while we're waiting for Casper.
Hello, everyone. Hey, thank you, Sage. I'm honored to be here. It's so cool to see people popping up from around the world joining us for this conversation. Super excited for this follow-up to the inhale and focusing on the exhale tonight. I'll be kind of navigating the chat here. So as the conversation gets flowing, feel free to just drop comments, questions in. Whether we get to all the comments or questions probably won't happen because we've got a a bunch of people in the room, but we want to continue this conversation via social media. We have a Facebook group that we started this week, so please join us there. We'll be chopping up this content and putting out more around this conversation in the weeks to come.
Outstanding. Thank you very much.
Owen.
Thanks.
So Owen's going to be taking point on this, and this is a free service. We're going to be doing this for free once a month, a panel discussion from 5 or so different schools all over the breathwork world. In order to keep this free, we're not going to ask you for money. What I am going to tell you is what we need right now are 2 things. We need a really edgy, cool, quirky graphic designer, and we need someone that knows post-production who can help cut these things up and get them out there to not only the panelists, but everywhere we can in the breathwork world for fun and for free so that this content can be leveraged. So if you are a post-production wizard or know one that has a little time to throw at volunteer work to get this out there, we're going to ask for that, and also for a graphic designer. Other than that, that's the end of the announcements, and we are ready to get started with the actual show. First, I want to check in with my hostess with the mostest, Miss Pamela Gold. How's it going, girl?
It's great, Sage. Thanks so much. I'm so psyched to have everybody here today.
It's good, right? You ready?
Yes, so ready. Let's do it.
All right, let's wind it up. First of all, let me introduce our panel this evening. Breathlab is a no-nonsense forum for dynamic discussions about all things breathwork, growth shifts, consciousness, and the science behind the function. We're an open mind share forum for anyone interested in a breath-inclusive lifestyle. What does that even mean? Well, it means that we believe that better breathing makes for better humans, and better humans makes for better humanity. So we go to any links to find the science behind the breath work. We ask the tough questions and shoot straight through the smoke and hot air that's currently surrounding the word breath work. Up first, we have Dan Brule. He's known as the Bruce Lee of breath, world's foremost breath master, author of Just Breathe and breathmastery.com, teacher to more than 140,000 people worldwide in the last 45 years, and leader of the worldwide spiritual breathing movement. Dan has studied breathwork with the world's leading spiritual and cultural luminaries and teaches some of the world's leaders in breathwork. Dr. Peter Litchfield, he is the founder of the School of Applied Behavioral Health Sciences. His areas of expertise include behavioral medicine, behavioral physiology, applied psychophysiology, research design, behavioral pharmacology, placebo effects, biological learning and motivation. I'm not going to keep going. Basically, he's the most knowledgeable scientific mind in the breathwork world, and we are joined by him this evening. It's an honor to have you here, Peter.
Thank you.
Next, Brian McKenzie. If they're elite, this man has coached them from big wave surfers to ultra endurance athletes, Hollywood moguls, and elite military units. Brian McKenzie has taught them to use their breath to excel in life and on the field. He co-authored the books Power, Speed, Endurance, and the New York Times bestseller Unbreakable Runner, my personal mentor and breath brother Brian. Casper van der Meulen, world-class breath and biohacking pioneer, former lead Wim Hof instructor, high school science teacher, seasoned professional musician, stage performer, and author of Mind Lift. Mental fitness for the modern mind. From beginner to mastermind, Casper has something for everyone. If you're looking into breath and biohacking, Casper is a great first, middle, and last place to go. Joe Miller has a bio too long and prestigious to even begin with, but let's start with 30 years of pioneering in movement, yoga, breathwork, and training over 500 teachers to use her tools and methods worldwide. She also created 2 seminal fitness formats, Yoga Tune-Up and The Role Model. It's also a best-selling book by the same name, and she has dozens of DVDs. She designs mobility programs for large fitness brands and professional sport teams. She's been featured on just about every media outlet you can think of. Please help me welcome our panel. Everybody, thank you. All right, we're going to start ladies first. Jill, I'd like you to go ahead, and we're going to go around with the panel. I want you to start with your 1-minute introduction on the exhale that would represent your school of thought, your particular methodology, or the summation of your experience that you'd like to present to us. And then we'll start with the Q&A and the round robin.
Ladies first. Well, thank you for the introduction, and I'm excited to hear what everybody else has to say today. I'd say that my perspective on breathing out comes first with the notion of expression. As a former singer and former dancer, although I do sing and dance, a lot of my breath training came early in the performing arts. But the biggest training of all was watching my mother not be able to get breath out of her body as an asthmatic. And so my the activities that I like to share with students and people all around the world are ways of very simply impacting the mechanical process of breathing by using tools, position, mindset, and, well, the breath itself as a tool.
Excellent. Casper.
Yeah, I'll link in with the expression that Jill just expressed, where it's so fantastic to think about that every single thing you've ever expressed in your life has happened on an exhale. It's a very amazing thing. Every sigh, every word, every song, and it tells you so much. And for me, from a coaching perspective, the exhale is the window of opportunity for conscious control. And I work with people in very extreme environments and states. And whenever you lose the control of breath, which means you lose the ability to read and control and feel where your nervous system is, and you lose your auto-regulation, then the exhale is the place where you can jump back on the breath wave and get back into a state of self-regulation and find calm and allow yourself for a more self-aware state of mind. So to me, the exhale, also in my personal journey, struggling with anxiety and panic and these things, knowing that every single exhale is an opportunity to slow down, to gain control, to get back into that state of self-awareness and regulation. That's really the short of it for me.
Thank you very much. Dr. Peter Litchfield.
Sure. For me and in our work, focus on the exhale is central to where we begin working with people. We look at physiology as being a psychological activity, not just physical. That respiration and breathing is psychophysiological. And in the exhale, you can discover a lot of what the psychology of that particular person's breath is about. That is, for example, if you focus very carefully, if you have your client learn to truly be an observer of the exhale, where they really can step away from it, which is very difficult for people to do. Usually when people focus on their breathing, they necessarily somehow get involved in it. Almost invariably, we find. And it takes some time before people really feel they can observe that exhale. But once you can observe that exhale, even though it's brief, there's so much that you can see in it. You can see the unconscious intentionality, for example, that gets tied up with breathing, which can become very problematic in deregulating the chemistry of the body, thereby generating all kinds of symptoms. So you can locate that intentionality in a split second. You can find the emotion that's embedded in the breath and how it's involved in regulation. You can discover the motivation that can be behind the way the person is breathing. And in essence, you can really look at the psychophysiology of the breathing by helping that person focus on that exhale. Part of that being learning how to allow rather than to push that exhale or to force it, which is often the case because people get concerned with getting the exhale over with so they can get that next breath, and that's where you can see the intentionality and you can see the motivation when that happens. You're looking at a very short time frame, but very often in a split second, a person can discover the anxiety that's embedded in that breath and is driving the way that they're breathing. So my message about the exhale really has to do with helping a person understand the psychology of the breath rather than just the physicality and the manipulation of the mechanics.
Thank you, Peter. Brian.
I really like what I've just heard from everybody. You know, I think the biggest thing I've been able to kind of understand about breath work has been in the exhale and understanding that where you know, the differentiation between the inhale and the exhale is that we lack sympathetic tone within that exhale. So there's an inhibition of sympathetic tone. And how long we get to be there is determined on how well we can regulate. And so this is exactly what Dr. Litchfield was just getting into about this, the psychophysiology of it all, and the fact, you know, one of the key things that we've been mulling around and I've kind of come more to believe in is that, you know, psychology is probably just misunderstood physiology. And our inability to understand regulation falls in this path of the exhale. And, you know, that's the biggest thing that changes when we go from an upright state into a, you know, in a vertical state into a horizontal, is when we go to sleep, that change happens in that exhale, and where everything starts to really allow us to fall into place. And they're equally important, but the exhale for me is that place where how you talk, how you speak, how you communicate, what your expression is, as Casper and Jill have explained, is held through that exhale. Everything is held through that exhale, and how well you're actually able to control that shows how well you can actually control that tone, where you want to be in the state you want to be in. And so I really think it's a profound thing. And yeah, I appreciate everybody's input here.
Thank you, Brian. Dan Burley.
Yeah, I think people really need to have the experience of the exhale being a way to come home, to come back to center, come back to source, come back to balance, come back to harmony, come back to their natural flow. For me, the exhale is that trigger for that. You know, we hope that we can train in such a way that we can lean into the exhale. We can kind of get a handle on the exhale in a way that turns us from one state to another, from one mood to another. That's like it becomes like a switch, like a trigger that's available to us anytime, anywhere. When we start to get out of balance, when we start to get to, that we can turn to that exhale and use it, what we call a coming home breath. And coming home to natural, physiological, biological parameters, but more than that, coming home to that place in us, which I like to talk about as the eye of the storm, the place that kind of transcends all the ups and downs of emotions and physiology and adrenaline and chemistry and all that stuff. There is a place that we can find in ourselves that even in the middle of all that stuff and in spite of all that stuff, that we can touch a certain place of unshakable peace and clarity and stillness and calmness. And then from there, think and talk and act and move and perform. So I'm a big believer in training into ourselves the ability to turn to that exhale like a light switch, like pulling the plug on a bathtub, and everything just naturally finds its way to where it belongs in us. We find our way back to our best self.
Thank you, Dan. JT in the chat says the exhale is how you hold yourself. That's really true. I hear two separate conversations going on. I want to touch on each of these. Jill, you kicked it off beautifully with expression, and Casper, you filled into that discussion around everything that you've ever done is on an exhale. I want to talk about, when we get back to you in a second, I want you to talk about the exhale you did after you carried your personal record of whatever that was, insane on Instagram. I saw you carry like 8,000 pounds. And then I want to hear about that. But you guys talked about expression and creativity, and I want to go in that direction in 1 second. Brian and Dan and Peter, I need you to moderate here. Dan has a style that I've studied, and Brian has a style that I've studied. Both of them shift state very, very quickly. If you're listening to this and you don't know what that means is you're in a position here, A, like stuck in traffic, and you're going to get out and do something about it that's untoward. And you want to get into position B, which is calm as a Hindu cow in the middle of LA 101, middle of the day freeway traffic. Brian has a means by which it's actively proposed that you exhale Ujjayi slowly and you control. As I understand it, there's a lot of control. Now, other side of that coin, Dan, you actually have a neurological trigger that you've claimed is sitting at the top of the inhale that is only activated and pushed like a little button that a mouse can push every time you drop the exhale. And so the practice becomes, how do I elegantly drop that exhale to trigger the nervous system with a sigh of relief that's safe? That seems to me to be a very rude, crude, and inconsiderate hack for all of this other work that everyone's putting in. Like, you found a shortcut, and I say that with all the love in my heart. Can you please talk about why you seem to be proposing the opposite of what science and a lot of other people are saying in terms of controlling the exhale? And I want to get you guys talking. And Peter, I'd like you to explain why both of these works.
Who are you speaking to first?
Oh, I think
Dan.
oh,
Dan.
go ahead, Peter.
Dan.
Yeah, go.
Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, okay. Yeah, when we let go of the exhale, I encourage people to develop the skill to snap the exhale loose, dump the exhale out, set the exhale free, let the exhale go. And that's a way for us to get out of the way, in other words, to just get out of the way of the breathing and don't be the one that's interfering, but be the one who is surrendering to your nature, to the natural flow of breath, to how the breath wants and needs to move by itself. And as Peter said, it's very difficult for us to become conscious of the breathing without automatically getting tangled up in it and starting to, do artificial things. It takes real practice to simply observe the breath. And the most we can hope for, I think, are moments of that without really great practice. So I think what Peter is also talking about is getting out of the way. And so, but I've been in situations where I didn't have time to take a nap for 20 minutes or a rest for an hour. I had just got through with a huge, important, stressful thing. I was ready to just chill for a while, and bang, there was another emergency. The alarm went off. Somebody else is drowning. Somebody else is burning. And I didn't have the luxury of finding a way to recover and renew myself through all the traditional ways of a good night's sleep and, a few hours of downtime. I didn't have that luxury. I had to find another way that when I needed to be up and at 'em, it didn't matter how tired I was, how confused I was, how sick I was. I needed to be able to snap into the flow, into saving lives, rescuing, whatever my job was at the time. And so for me, it just started to work for me. I could gather up all my energy. I could gather up everything that's happened in the last few hours, a few days. I could bring it all up and let it all go. And it's like coming out from a dark jungle or coming out from under a cloud into the light. And when I saw that potential was there, I was just motivated to just really drill down on it and see just how good I can get with it. And I'm still playing that game, and I'm trying to get as many of my students to play that game as possible.
So you learned it on the street. This is a street tried and true functional practice that you picked up in the course of everyday life.
Yeah, I learned it getting the shit beat out of me and laying there on the ground and saying, well, am I going to get up and let them kick me to death, or am I going to find something in me and make this stop? and that snapping loose of the exhale, it was like I let go of all the fear, all the hesitation, all the tension, all the negative talk. It just like, boom, it's just like a bubble burst. And I was like, I had an instant of inspiration, motivation. And it's not just adrenaline. It's more of a genuine energy than an adrenalized energy. I mean, I know I can turn on a lot of adrenaline and I can perform, but I'm looking to, there's something else. There's something more pure. There's something, it's like a genuine energy. And we get to that by surrendering and by opening and by allowing and by flowing, not by pushing, not by controlling, not by knowing, not by forcing. And to me, that training of the release of the exhale just brings all of that together into one action, one practice.
Beautiful, thank you. And Peter, we're going to ask you for the science behind the sigh of relief in a moment. Brian, can you please explain or just talk through your process then of shifting a state? Dan has this sort of open arms and drop it, let it go. You have a far more detailed system. Can you just tell us about that and how you've seen it work? And it's the opposite.
Well, I don't know if it's a system. Based on my understanding, you know, when we focus on the inhale and the driver, we're driving more sympathetic tone. This is true of bringing oxygen in, right? And so the faster we're actually doing that, the more we're upticking the system. What I found, and I'm just going to use this example because a lot of people on here probably can understand this because they probably participate in this world, where they use cold immersion, right? Cold training. You know, one of the things I picked up on very quickly with people who jumped in ice tubs or into the cold water when we were using it as a medium was how they could not exhale. And so it instantly became something where I said, okay, control your exhale as fast as you can. Train your exhale. Yeah. And so if you draw an inhale and then control the exhale, we started to see people's changes instantly happen. Well, I wouldn't say instantly. They happened far faster. People made adaptive processes to something that was taking others or took them longer prior to how to train the actual exhale. So we slowed down the breathing rhythm, right? And so that trigger came into effect. Well, that mechanism came into play where we started focusing on breath control through the exhale. Now, not everything we do is on the exhale, but the exhale is important in that if we're working on most people, we're dealing with people who don't know what stress is. They don't know how to manage stress. They don't get it. They continue to put themselves in front of screens. They continue to turn on TVs and look at the news, and then they continue to react in ways that they don't understand because they've missed every physiological signal leading up to the emotional outburst. And through training the breath and specifically that exhale, we're taking highly sympathetic in tone individuals and giving them a rhythm that's actually retraining how they're actually responding to more parasympathetic tone, right? Adding in more parasympathetic tone. And that comes with some, you know, subtle nuances or that, you know, that's very generalized in what we're talking about. But if I'm got somebody where we've trained them through slow controlled breathing or control of an exhale, we're actually teaching them how to actually listen to what's going on and learn what's going on, which is also why if I haven't been in the ice tub for quite some time and I get in, it'll take me probably 3 or 4 breaths to get a hold of my exhale because I'm not adapted to it, right? So I'm not adapted to that stressor, where right now I'm pretty adapted. When I get into the cold, I can control it on the immediate. So my body's pretty adapted to it, and I know how to control the situation, which is in any situation. That's what we teach, is where and how to control this in any situation you get into. So using that with inside the spectrum of, let's just say, work capacity. I put somebody on a bike, a stationary bike, and have them hold 200 watts. And if I control their breathing, it's that exhale that mainly is getting controlled. And it's, and the physiology behind that is the control of the carbon dioxide being offloaded, right? From a mechanical standpoint, I'm now teaching that diaphragm and all of those expiratory muscles that are involved in exhale, especially within the voice, how to actually take that eccentric load or that exhale on so that it actually becomes programmed throughout somebody's day, and we don't have somebody who's leaning into more as much sympathetic tone. So that's where where and why we've actually gone at it from this angle.
So it sounds so much like a stepping stone as opposed to something that's the opposite. What I'm hearing is that it's perhaps not a first step, but a good step towards maximizing, you know, results and performance, and maybe one day getting to the surrender that Dan teaches. But until we're at that point, if you can't surrender to have control over the exhale,
I
Is
would
it a
say
step up?
yeah, that's a good interpretation. I would say by and large, most people don't have the ability to calm themselves down through breath. Maybe not so much here, but the vast majority of human beings out there don't have a natural pattern to this because they don't even understand their own nature. So how would one actually take something natural and just letting it go without proper training, which is where Dan comes in. If you go and spend some time with Dan, you're going to get dosed and you're going to learn pretty quickly how to breathe and get the impacts of that to drop out and then let it naturally happen and get this bang effect of like, holy shit, I can actually downshift right now. Like,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, may I add one thing to that point?
Please, Casper, please go.
Yes.
Yes.
Very much agree with everything that's been said, and I think the stepping stone is that's the you can train to that shortcut. So when one of my first encounters with breath is when I hope you guys can hear me all right. I'm in the middle of nowhere
Yes.
in Iceland. I'm literally looking out
Perfectly well.
to a
Loud and
glacier
clear.
right now. Great. I found a local that was willing to lend me his Wi-Fi. So one of my first encounters with coaching somebody in breathwork was when I knew nothing about breathing. I was a science teacher. I had a kid who had test anxiety before a physics test, and they were there. And the only thing I could do, like intuitively, I stepped in and I started matching their breath, doing this with them, and then I was like, okay, and I started controlling that exhale. And then at the end, it turns into a sigh of relief, and then they're there. And I've seen this with thousands of people in ice baths. I just had it 2 hours ago when I was in a glacial runoff waterfall. I'm just bragging about this awesome trip. And I notice myself, I step in and it hits me very hard. And then I know that so there's this inhale, focus, sympathetic state. And then there's the sigh of relief. So the shift is, how do you get from there to there? And it starts with the controlled exhale. You have to really learn to control that, to build the mechanics of control, to get to the correct biochemical state, that you don't over blow out the exhale, right? Because that only makes things worse eventually. And then I've seen this with thousands of people also in ice baths and in other intense situations, is that when you help people control the exhale, there's a point where the system starts to recognize safety. And once that safety place has been reached, there will be that natural exhale, right? So it's important for people to understand this sigh of relief, all right? So it's important for people to understand that if you enter a state of relief, you will get that sigh of relief, but you need to get yourself there. But that doesn't mean that controlling the exhale the whole day long, if you're anxious, is you need to have a small intervention that gets back to natural, and then get to that place where it happens kind of automatically, right? And I think that Brian explained that beautifully, is that the state that kind of Dan is hacking into that system and getting there right away, but especially with practiced people, they get there faster and faster, and they recognize it happening. And then to get out of the way, like breathing practice, controlling the exhale is an intervention, and then once the intervention has worked, you get out of the way and let biology do the thing, because once you hit that state, the body will take over with the correct action.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Casper. That's exactly right. And I'd like to point out that Dan and Brian both have worked with militaries in very different ways.
Yeah.
One military, go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
And just to pop on top of that, like from a nervous system standpoint, what Casper's talking about, the sympathetic nervous system's job is to put you in an autonomous protective state. That is it. You have no say when you are fully sympathetic. You are going to respond and react and protect. And so this more parasympathetic side allows for that to come out of that protective state, to where we get so much in society, and so many athletes and so many people that we're working with who don't even realize like that they're even here. And that's where we can get them out, and where that intervention should come in. But it shouldn't have to be an all-day thing, right? Like it should be this process of taking the body into a place of, hey, safety's here. You can calm down now.
And that's really what that cheat, that hack, that sigh of relief that Dan taught me and that I teach daily is. It's this beautiful, and when you focus right on that, it really is rude because it just bypasses everything. It just, if you can get that, I say to people, if I could teach you one thing only, get this sigh of relief. That has saved my life in the last 4 months. Joe Miller, before we go to Peter Litchfield to tell us why both of these, control and letting go, works, what would you like to say about all of this?
Well, there were many things.
1 second, Peter. Sorry, I want to hear from Joe real quick because I know you're going to bring the science and the heat, and I want to hear what Joe has to say.
I want you to be the closer on this one, Peter, because I'll probably throw out some things that maybe you can weave in also, which is, this has just been so interesting. And Dan, I have not had a chance to be in your presence and study with you, but I want to be led through the sigh of relief. I'm sure somehow involuntarily this is occurring in my life, and some practice that I've tumbled through in the 30 or 40 years that I've been yogaing. But one of the impressions that I have when I'm hearing you talk about, well, I guess with Casper and Brian, referring to the ice bath, what we're talking about is this, well, the ice bath in a way is a very controlled stimulus because, we have this sort of shock to the system, temperature goes up through the interoceptive cortex. And one of the multiple ways to stimulate breath shifts is stimulation that impacts our interoception. And so if we are able to adjust other subtle physiological things like our relationship to gravity, our physical and our limb position, then we can really alter or sort of compound the alterations that also blend in with breathing. So breathing alone, when we are cueing somebody to breathe and they haven't done breath training, as Brian is pointing out, so many people haven't, it's this abstract thing. I mean, we know how to blow out candles on a birthday cake because that's this ritual thing. People are used to blowing out candles. Women, when they're pregnant, they get a little bit of breath training because you need to breathe to push. That is, if you are going to push, although with the rate of cesarean sections, even our breath is taken away from us in the context of birth now. So just to think about with impacting shifts in global breath patterns, when you start to think about breathing and you haven't thought about breathing before, one of the things I say is your breath becomes very self-conscious. And all of a sudden, if you're trying to do an unconscious, observing the unconscious breath pattern, like being in a breath laboratory, I tell my students, you are the breath scientist and you're observing breath in a laboratory. Your body's the laboratory and it's your experiment to watch breath enter and leave you. So I attempt to create certain dissociative and embodied cues to help them to commingle those things. But if you've never paid attention to breathing, your breath already will feel threatened because it's got this spotlight on it. And so that immediately puts up our body defenses. So sometimes tricking the body with other compound effects that can alter parasympathetic tone, interoceptive perception, that is a way to help the exhale to feel less under the spotlight. There was a really interesting comment from Justin, who left, I think, but he said this one thing while Brian was talking, and it I really wanted to grab it and respond to it. And maybe this is also for Dan also, but he said, is letting go of the exhale yet another form of controlling the exhale? Is the uncontrolling, I mean, if you're making a choice about not controlling the exhale, isn't that still a chosen pattern? But really, when we decide to not think about breathing, your exhale is happening voluntarily. It's happening. So the choice of practice around breathing, yes, it is controlling to watch your exhale leave your body. But it's very good to train your brain and your body to be able to be on both sides of the coin, to be able to control your inhale and to not control your inhale, to control your exhale with certain tensions and to also let it exit your body without you trying to squeeze it out or push it out or thrust it out or throw it away. So those are my reflections on the last 20 minutes.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jill. All of the science of what you're talking about is really, we're dealing, for anyone who's new, this is all nervous system stuff. And we're talking about the direct connection between breath, brain, nervous system, and body. And these things are all very involved in what Jill's talking about. If you're new or just joining the breath world and the breath conversation, is that your nervous system is so entwined with your breath that there's almost no way to inextricably unlink the two. And you can't get them apart. And the breath is a reflection of life and what's going on, psychophysiology and all of that. I just want to say, Steffi asked if Dan would demonstrate the exhale. What I'm going to do, because we don't have time to do that right now, I just put a Zoom link in the meeting. If anyone who wants to, at 7:30, we can jump over and actually test this out. Anyone who wants to breathe and do what I have a side thing called Breath Church. It's the experience version of the education. If you want to jump over, there's a link to Breath Church right there, right now in the Zoom. We'll go at 7:30 and we'll just do a half-hour session. I'll do some music and we'll practice breath work and we can practice different types of exhales. I'll take you through a few different things that I do when we do it every night on that link at 6 p.m. Several of the facilitators are on the call, so we can experience breath together. We've heard from all our panelists except for probably the most qualified. Peter, can you please tell us from the most scientific vantage that you have why controlling the exhale works and then controlling the exhale by letting the exhale go actually works?
Well, I would,
how are those the same?
You were alluding to the idea that somehow Dan and others were speaking from opposite ends of things, that is, controlling versus not controlling, which I'll get to in a second, but there's just a few observations that I wanted to pass on, I thought would be important for us to remember. One was Casper talking about modeling the breathing. I think that is an outstanding technique for assisting people who have dysfunctional kinds of breathing problems. We do that a lot. It's very effective. And when I heard Casper explain that and kind of imitate what he did with one particular person he was working with, it just reminded me of how important that really is, and that we all try to remember, what do we remember from a session like this? One of the things would be what Casper brought to light. I think it's very important. And then also, I think Jill was talking about breathing being a reflection of life. I think that was you, Jill, is that right? Yeah, and I think that that is so true, that, for example, people who are control conscious, control freaks, those kinds of individuals who are constantly trying to control everything and everybody else, you can very clearly see that in the breath. The metaphor is operating there in the breath, and we see it all the time. And then going on again to what Jill was talking about, where allowing the breath is a kind of a control. That is very central in what we do, because people who are control nuts, who are really concerned with controlling everything, we try to walk them into the idea that allowing the breath is controlling the breath. And once they've bought into that, they tend then to follow what Dan is talking about, where they can let go. And in our work, I should say, we're very aligned with what Dan does. We do it precisely the kind of thing, not exactly the same, but very close to the same. But conceptually, it's exactly the same. What we do in our work is what Dan does in his work. So anything, with those things said, I would like to just make this observation as we lead into the subject of observation, as I would say, versus manipulation. And that is what we've been talking a lot about, mechanics. And, we've been talking about manipulating the breath and the nervous system and how we can influence the nervous system. But what we've missed in this discussion is the fundamental chemistry of the breathing, which is the respiration. That's the respiratory side, and we haven't included that. It's been mentioned, like Brian mentioned it briefly, but we haven't really included that significantly at all. And more importantly yet, is we haven't really included the behavioral side. which is where we learn the way we breathe unconsciously. We develop unconscious habits that have immense impacts on us. And regardless of the manipulation we do, regardless of the techniques that we learn, regardless of the knowledge we acquire in the subject, regardless of the great demonstrations we can do with our breath, our habits remain. Generally, habits are not influenced by those considerations. It requires getting involved in the breath experientially to discover the psychological nature of it. What is it that's motivating the way you're breathing now? What is the outcome associated with the way you're breathing now that sustains that functional or dysfunctional kind of breathing that you're engaging in at this moment? Remembering that breathing is extremely different from one moment to the next because we've learned different habits that are triggered in those moments. So we can't really talk about breathing just about the nervous system and manipulating the breath to get the outcomes of the nervous system, or engaging in the right kind of mechanics and controlling things this way or that way and so on. We need to integrate the fundamental part of what breathing is ultimately about, respiration, the most fundamental part. And if you're going to get to the spiritual side and that part that Dan's interested in, you need to understand the chemical side as well, and then the behavioral picture that needs to be integrated. That's my sense of how our conversation has been going. Now, on the subject of manipulation versus observation, as various people have already alluded to, these things are not in conflict, as perhaps Sage was asking about when he first brought this up. They're not in conflict. They're two different kinds of things. They're different objectives. When you're manipulating the breath, you have a certain kind of objective in mind, like what Brian is talking about, for example. But when you're allowing the breath, then there's another kind of objective that's involved. There are other issues that are involved. And one can support the other. One can be work in behalf of the other. For example, I've heard a lot about how manipulating the exhale can play a significant role in learning how to let the exhale go on its own, for example. So, that kind of transition was being brought to light, but I think it's something we can make explicit and understand that, that's the case. You can do that. Just starting with a little bit on Dan, this is so much of the problem around breathing and the work that we do. People are trying to control it and manipulate it all the time, thinking somehow that they don't know how to do it, thinking that there's something wrong with their breathing and they've got to do it the right way and they have to count the right way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hold, do this, do that, or they're going to be in trouble. When quite to the contrary, that really the manipulation isn't about that. It's about achieving certain very specific objectives like the ones Brian is talking about. It's not a way of life to run around manipulating your breath. The way of life is to what Dan is talking about, being in what the breath is about, discovering yourself, that is, again, the psychological nature of the breath, and that peace that comes with allowing the breath, not pushing the breath. We find one of the main problems in dysfunctional breathing, people are pushing their breath, constantly pushing their breath out, thinking somehow the breath isn't going to go out. Somehow it's in here and it's not going to go anywhere unless I do something and push. And then they get into that habit of manipulating the breathing that way all the time, and the chemistry goes nuts. And they end up with 911 and they're in the hospital. And they don't have any idea why, and neither do the practitioners they're working with, except they hand them a paper bag or something. And then they go back out there and they work on their breathing, trying to manipulate it and get it right and do all the right things, when really that's not where it's at when it comes to just breath in normal day life. And that's where Dan is, where Brian is, for example. It's another whole level where you're looking at performance, you're looking at, for me, that's once you know how to control your breath, once you know how to observe your breath, once you can observe it, you know the difference between observing and manipulating, and you can allow it or not allow it, which we call negative practice. You allow, you don't allow, you allow, you don't allow. You become an expert at not allowing so that you know how to allow. So once you can do that, then I see what Brian's doing, for example, becomes another whole level that you can introduce into the system. So I would start with what Dan does, and I would end up where Brian is.
That's fantastic, actually. That's a really very well put, well placed fulcrum between the two. Let me ask you a question. What if, well, if this relaxation, if this reset, this neural reset happens with the sigh of relief in the way Dan's doing it, can it be applied in a live fire super elite performance situation? What I was going to say before is Brian and Dan have each worked with elite military units on both sides of the ocean, and Brian's got a very unique application that's the same application in a very elite military performance setting. Dan does the same thing, learn from the Russians who hang out and beat each other senseless and teach each other to relax during what he says and do.
Well, the one comment I would make about that, I'm working right now with the New Zealand Special Forces. I'm doing training with them right now. And one of the points that I make to them is that when you're in action, you know, this is not a time to intervene with some kind of a technique. The idea is to breathe, you know, as optimally as you can automatically. That it's an ingrained habit that you've learned over a period of time, that when you get into a challenging situation, you don't have to think about it. It just happens. And there are ways that you can train a person, or a person really trains themselves. You're not really training anyone. You're guiding someone, and they're in a learning process, and you guide them in that learning process.
I think the three of us would agree that probably at no point in an operation should anybody be trying to, you know, train. Everything should be falling into place through habit in training.
Right.
Which is where we all kind of focus anyway.
Exactly. So anyway, the habit part of it is such a fundamental part of it. You know, that's what the habits are. The great thing about them is that they are automatic. It is a physiological reconfiguration, and it's triggered, and it does its job in exactly precisely the correct situation. That's the nature of a habit. That's the purpose of creating them, so the organism can do other things while these habits carry them through the basic things in life. But anyway, getting to the nervous system part of it, you know, you're getting into things like respiratory sinus arrhythmia, you're getting into heart rate variability kinds of things, parasympathetic, sympathetic functioning, but there's a lot of misunderstanding around that subject. And one I would just like to point out to you is that people confuse heart rate variability with parasympathetic tone, that somehow, you know, high heart rate variability, you know, it reflects parasympathetic tone, but it isn't parasympathetic tone in and of itself. Okay, it's a measurement of parasympathetic tone, but it's also a measurement of other things. And you can confuse them and draw a faulty conclusion about what's going on. If I take larger breaths, that respiratory sinus arrhythmia, which is, you're going to see that parasympathetic component get big. It looks like it's a parasympathetic component, but really what it is, it's a mechanical effect. And you have to separate out the mechanical effects on heart rate variability from the parasympathetic effects. And what you find in a lot of people is they confuse them. They can see a change in the respiratory sinus arrhythmia or the high frequency heart rate variability, and they conclude it's parasympathetic, when in fact it is purely a mechanical kind of an effect. So that's something that gets missed by so many people who do heart rate variability work. But nevertheless, that change in parasympathetic tone that you can get in the breathing, you only really observe it clearly. You get that shift when you're already in a parasympathetic state. You can see that as you breathe in, you can see that parasympathetic system gets inhibited. And so you see the heart rate start to take off. And then as you breathe out, then the parasympathetic nervous system comes back in, you see heart rate go back down. But if you're stressed, you don't see that. It's flat as a board. You don't get that rise, that sudden sympathetic rise, if you will, with that great parasympathetic drop. It's nullified. It's out. It's observable, and it happens when the person is in a relatively relaxed state. If you're in a high level state, you're not going to see that shift. So that's something to be aware of. You know, you have to look at the complexity of the phenomenon. It's not so simple as it looks.
Thank you, Peter. So we've had a discussion around various aspects of nervous system, of biochemistry, biomechanics, and the spirituality of it. And it's my personal take, and this is why Owen is taking the education and breath lab side, because I'm on the experience and the woo side. I believe that science invariably runs out of ideas and proof and capacity for proof, and we all end up at the door of spirituality going, I don't know what the hell anyway. I don't know, something, someone, somewhere. I mean, breath is electric, and I'm going to leave you with this, and then Dan, I'm just going to ask you to bring us a very basic spiritual thought and maybe a couple of breaths, because we all end up back at the very basis of letting go. And I forgot what my other thought was. So Dan, why don't you just take us for a couple of seconds? I don't even remember what it was. It wasn't important. Let's focus just for a moment, Dan. And if you could, and we're going to do Breath Church in a minute. We'll go to that other link for anyone who wants to, but just take us for a second through sort of the sum total of all of this science, all of the study, all of the quantification. It's vital. It's important to translate what you're talking about to people who don't want to hear it and don't even believe it. But for those of us who have experienced something, I was going to say your breath is electric. Affects pH, right? It raises and measures, and pH is measure of voltage in a liquid. So we're breathing electricity. Dan, how is the spirituality and the science entwined? And is there something you want to show us or give us a tangible example of the exhale? We got 4 minutes before we're out. We're not going to get to the discussion around.
Can I put 15 seconds in?
Oh, would you please? It would be rude not.
If maybe some of you saw the kind of the David Bohm special that was last Saturday about the famous physicist David Bohm, and one of the messages is about quantum mechanics and consciousness. And one of the things that they pointed out is all the great thinkers in the area of physics, all the equations that are written and so on, they come from a gut feeling. That's where they come from in the first place. It comes from that spiritual side. It's a gut feeling. It comes out, and then they try to express it and turn it into something. And that was an important message in that whole worldwide seminar or present panel kind of interview around quantum physics and consciousness, that the universe is psychophysical. Like I talk about physiology being psychophysiological. They were talking about the universe as being psychophysical, which I thought was fantastic to hear these people saying.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Was that
Yeah.
David Fleming?
David Bohm was what they were celebrating his life, and
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
and they had different people on the panel who were really out there. Some, I mean, really outstanding. You know, a philosopher, a famous physicist from Switzerland, another one from Germany, and then a anesthesiologist who worked with Robert Penrose, who was narrating from the University of Arizona. It was just a fantastic presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Dan,
Wow,
if
this is
science
all
opens up at the door of spirituality.
Yeah, this is also really beautiful, baby. Just it helps to clarify things. It's really beautiful. I really appreciate these breath labs. So a couple of things, just that I'll bring it all together for me. You know, when we were kids, we had this little Chinese torture device. We called it that. It was basically a coiled spring, and you stuck your fingers in it, and you try to pull your fingers apart. And the harder you tried to pull your fingers apart, the tighter the spring got on your fingers. And so I think what we're talking about with people is they get all jammed up when they try to do the exhale, or they try to breathe, or and they're just getting more and more jammed up. And there's no way, you can't keep going that way. You got to go from flip to flop. You got to just disconnect, stop forcing and trying. It's not going to get you there, and develop this ability to let go, right? And that the reflex point we talk about, the sigh of the relief, right? If I stretch everything and I'm very full, if I just relax, the exhale is reflexive. And so it's a genuine act of letting go, of relaxation. And it's a pure act of relaxation when you allow the exhale to just release. You got to prime it by creating all that internal pressure with the inhale, but then it's a very felt ability to just let go and see how the breath moves by itself. And then from there, you can allow the breath to keep moving by itself. And what somebody said about, you know, when you're in the shitstorm, it's no time to be training, right? Hopefully you have to have already trained, because when you don't have time to think, it's your training that kicks in. And so if you haven't trained in it, it's going to be really hard to find it in that moment. But the whole bigger picture for me around control. And so if I'm neurotic and I'm controlling myself, who's really controlling me? Me or my neuroses, right? And so this tactical breathing aspect, like, you know, box breathing was just all about control the inhale, control the pause, control the exhale, control the pause. But then when your feet hit the ground, you just hope that you just keep breathing and your breath is moving and your body's helping it pump, and you're just making sure you're not holding your breath. You just keep your breath moving. And they call that tactical breathing, and it's really like connected breathing. But basically the exhale is this powerful, you know, it's like when you say, charge, rah! And the whole army is like shouting and running towards you. They're using that exhale to release all of this readiness. And I watched a beautiful pianist in Russia one time. I could see the conductor was getting everybody, you know, everybody get together, all pay attention. He was raising it up. And I watched the pianist gradually take an inhale. And when the beat came down for everybody to start, he released the exhale and started playing the piano. And it was just the most beautiful thing. I could see how he was building up the readiness, he was building up his focus. And then when the baton moved, he exhaled and his fingers started moving at the same time. Now, what a pure demonstration of putting together energy and talent and actual actions and movement. But the other thing, we play with both sides of the exhale. We play with the reflex at the top, just setting it free, letting it go. But we also follow it all the way down to empty, and you squeeze everything out. And then when you relax, the breath pours into you. You don't have to pull it in. You don't have to inhale. And you can rely on these reflexes to do the work for you. And that kind of frees up a lot of energy. We're not working against ourselves or fighting against ourselves. And there was a beautiful scene in that movie, Deer Hunter. It's that 30-year-old movie. Anyway, they were in a cage in the river in Vietnam, and they were having a Russian roulette game inside the building, and they were down to the last two guys, and one of them really panicked and started like getting in, and they got together and they, and for a minute or so they breathed together. What a great scene in that movie on the power of when you get all jammed up, get your breath moving. Because in my real experience, when the shit hit the fan, when people were at the end of their rope, there were two things they couldn't do. They couldn't enjoy a sigh of relief, and they just couldn't allow the breath to just flow freely. And so that became the two things I started training. Practice being able to allow your breath to spin like a wheel and flow freely and not be caught up by all your tension and fear. Set the breath free from all that stuff. And the other thing is to be able to expand and relax when you're under pressure, when you're all jammed up. And if you can't, and I realized that those were the two skills that people lost in those moments when they're at the end of their rope. And so we just started training to make sure that we could access those two things when we were at the end of the rope. And that made all the difference in the world, life and death in some situations.
Thank you very much.
It comes down to a simple sigh of relief, which should be, you know, I mean, everybody knows it already. You know how it feels. You just exaggerate it. And that's it. Trust your nature. This isn't rocket science. It's basically simple stuff. And, but you also have to have this, so you have this ability to let go. And you also have this ability to squeeze the breath out and let go and allow the breath to come in. So, you know, we train, there are lots of ways to train, and in specific cases, this isn't how you go through your everyday life breathing. You have certain breathing exercises that you do for training purposes. And the rest of the time, you hope that the automatic pilot has been improved a bit and that your natural, normal, unconscious breathing keeps getting better and better the more that you train. So sigh of relief doesn't take teaching. We all know what it is. Just enjoy it, exaggerate it, magnify it, and just start to use it consciously.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Dan. And on that note, we're going to close it out. hello@breathlab.io. hello@breathlab.io is how you can reach Owen. Thank you to James, who volunteered as a designer and for post-production. We're going to go ahead and reach out to you. Make sure Owen and George, if you can pull that email out of the chat, that'd be great. We will get back to you. And if anyone wants to reach out, hello@breathlab.io. The link to Breath Church, which will be happening now, give me a minute to go refresh, grab a sip of water, and we'll just hop over and we'll play around with some of these exhale techniques. That was in the chat as well. I'll just one last time see if I can type it in there for you. Boom, there it is. It's going to be a Zoom meeting coming up in about 5 minutes. We'll get together and breathe to music and feel. Dr. Peter Litchfield, Dan Brule, Jill Miller, Casper Vandermeulen, and Brian McKenzie, thank you so much for an incredible Breath Lab 3.0. Jill, we're going to have you back to have you talk about the diaphragm vacuum technique, all that cool stuff that we know you know how to do. And Pam has a question that she put in the chat about fascia and changing habits. I'm really dying to know on that one. So maybe we can have a private call. We can have that one figured out. It would be really nice to have that chat. But we'll definitely continue this conversation moving forward. We also didn't get to expression, creative expression. And you guys as musicians, we want to talk about the exhale. Expression.
Just a few things, just a few.
That'll be Breath Lab 80.2 or something. So thank you all for being there, everyone. I really appreciate you. I'm Sage Rader, joined by Pamela Gold, hostess with the mostest. That's you.
Love you guys. I appreciate everybody's participation. Always learn so much, so inspiring. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much. And we will be coming out with the latest, greatest, most interesting, fun, wonderful, and wild things going on in breathwork. Please look for more communications from us. We'll see you in Breath Church in a few minutes, folks. Have a beautiful, beautiful night.